I hope everybody can see my screen okay.
Beautiful.
Awesome, thank you. All right, hello everyone. I am so glad to be here and joining you this Thursday evening or whatever time it is wherever you are. We are going to be talking about family food, using family recipes for family history. And it is really a good time for that. We are coming up to Thanksgiving, and usually that's a really popular time for families to get together. Now, I say usually because things have been a little bit different. We have had this, I don't know, thing called the pandemic, and people haven't been gathering nearly as much. So this might also be a way for you to maybe virtually have conversations with your family. So I'd like to keep that on the forefront of your mind, kind of keeping this as ideas to think outside the box to engage with your families. Nothing's really been normal since March of 2020. So we're still working through that. And this may be an idea of something you can do is discuss family recipes with your family members near and far. So hopefully you'll be able to see people and be able to enjoy these recipes that you have in your families. But let's go ahead and get started. Yay. So we're going to talk about memory and food. So I would love for you guys, I know this might sound crazy, but I would love for you guys to actually close your eyes for a minute. I want you to imagine you are at whatever holiday event you most relate to that perhaps has pies. And we're going with holiday pies because Thanksgiving's coming up. But perhaps you guys had another dessert that was just solely what you guys had. Maybe it was, I don't know, cookies. Maybe it was cake. Whatever it may be, close your eyes and imagine being back in time with your family, childhood, whenever, and what that smell is. Get in the chat, guys. What do you smell? What are these memories that are evoking in your mind? Do you guys smell pumpkin pie? Chocolate chip cookies? All right, thank you. Yay, we're getting people to respond. Okay, it looks like, oh, I can't even say that word. Anne's cookies, English plum pudding, cigarette smoke, manicotti, black raspberry pie, buttermilk pie, apples and cinnamon, pecan pie, pumpkin pie, butterscotch pie, mince pie, lemon meringue pie, sweet potato pie, mincemeat pie, boiled custard. Do you guys remember being there? Can you just go back in time and think about with that smell and what you're seeing in the back of your mind? You can transport yourself just by that memory and thinking about what that smell is. Foods, traditions, these are things that are sacred. There's a shared identity. Different real mincemeat pie, yuck. I'm loving these comments. I'm seeing them all, guys, even if I don't read them off. These are really important things to not only families, but communities, religions, ethnicities. Different places have different food that means something to them and different food for different holidays. You know, it surprised me. My family's always had mashed potatoes and gravy. Mashed potatoes and gravy, that's just a thing. Holidays, whenever there's mashed potatoes, there's gravy. My husband's family doesn't use gravy, and it blew my mind the first holiday I went there. They put chicken noodle soup on their mashed potatoes, and I just was like, what? But why? I was so confused. But that's a case of somebody living in a different part of actually the state. His family came from southern Indiana. My family is from northern Indiana. And apparently there's a divide there. Some people use gravy, and some people use chicken noodle soup for their mashed potatoes. I didn't know that. It was something I had to learn. And it's really kind of interesting to think that not only are these things that different families, even in the same state, have different traditions that they have. I mean, it could be a different ethnicity, a different community in the same city, in the same town, could have a different tradition for food for whatever holiday or purpose. So it's really kind of fun to look at this and kind of think about, okay, what's my family eat? What's important to my family? What would a holiday be? Like, what would ruin a holiday if you didn't have this one dish at your family? Go ahead and put in the chat. This is an interactive program, guys. What would be the end of the holiday? Like, what would make it terrible if you guys didn't have this dish? Like, there are, and I'm seeing them come in. There are dishes that are so incredibly important, and it would ruin your holiday. It would just throw you off kilter if you didn't have that dish. And so I love the fact that this is getting you guys thinking about what it would be. And you guys have all different answers. And I think that is amazing. And I want you guys to note in the chat that you guys are having different answers, because we come from different families, different backgrounds. But it's really nice to appreciate that everybody has something else going on, but we're all the same in the fact that we have something like that. We have a traditional food with our family. So looking at all of these things, it can evoke a lot of memories, maybe of being in the kitchen with mom, baking a pie, baking a cake. Maybe it's that holiday meal that just you really have etched into your memory. Maybe it's making that pie with grandma. What about your school lunches? I mean, school lunches are kind of memory evoking. I can still remember the really awful pizza my elementary school served. It was terrible. I hate it. The smell of anything like it. Never want to smell that again. And if you ask my family, I will not eat fish because my cafeteria was also my gymnasium. And that was awful when there was fish in there. So one of the things that you have to remember is that food triggers memory. Smell, taste, all of these different senses trigger memory. And one of the things that we're doing is we are commemorating our own events. We're passing down oral histories by passing down these recipes. You're able to share something from a previous generation to a younger generation. So those of you that have learned a family recipe, who did you learn it from? Was it a parent, a grandparent, an aunt? Who was it? And notice I'm naming females. It could be a male. Just traditionally in our culture, it's usually the women, but who did you learn your recipes from? And who have you passed your recipes down to? Who do you want to pass your recipes down to? There's a lot of moms and grandmas. I love that there's my Armenian friend's mother. That's awesome. That means you've learned some very interesting recipes. So one of the things that I want you guys to think about is how we can keep these memories, keep these recipes alive, because these are a shared tradition. And so let's first talk about how these memories work, and then let's talk about how we can share and kind of expand our family histories by adding these recipes to our family histories. Because it's really interesting to think about the fact that a lot of these recipes are maybe handwritten by a parent or a grandparent. How many of you wish that you could have that person back? even for just 1 minute. Being able to hold something that they held in their hands, that they wrote, that they shared, isn't that priceless? I love the fact that we can share these recipes, this history with one another. But let's talk about these sensory memories. So we have the five senses. So we have the traditional names for them. So I just want to make sure that you guys have those, but it's hear, touch, see, smell, and taste. And the interesting thing with food is that it's possible for every single one of those senses to be in action with food because you can hear food cooking. If you're boiling something, if you have fried chicken in the oil and it's popping, or you can touch something, you can feel it in your mouth once you put it in, the consistency. You can see the food. You can see what it looks like. You can smell, and oh my gosh, that right there, that is one of the strongest memories. You can taste. You can taste it and be transported back immediately to another time and place. So one of the things that is talked about is called the Proust phenomenon. It's involuntary memory. So it's an autobiographical memory, I should say. So one of the things that happened is this author, Marcel Proust, wrote in Remembrance of Things Past. That's the translated title. He wrote about this, and it's the first time that it was really written about, that it was really thought about. So I'm going to just read this small portion, and you have a link to it. And suddenly the memory returns. The taste was that of the little crumb of Madeleine, which on Sunday mornings at Cambrai, because on these mornings I did not go out before church time, when I went to say good day to her in her bedroom, my Aunt Leonie used to give me, dipping it first in her own cup of real or lime-flowered tea. So he was taken back to a memory from when he was a child that he hadn't thought about in years. He couldn't figure out why he was remembering this taste. And he was transported back once he thought about it for a moment. And it's kind of interesting that we're able to do that. So memory and food, this is so important. This is what we're talking about. It's about the fact that these memories are sacred. This is that shared identity and passing down those recipes. I love looking at old cookbooks. I think it's probably one of my favorite things to do. Because you never know what recipes are going to pop up. You never know if they're going to be something that you've heard of before or something that's just completely out of the realm of your imagination. I used to work at the Indiana Historical Society, and when we had school groups come through, one of my favorite things to do was pull out a recipe book and read them the recipe for boiled calf's head. The looks on their faces were priceless, and they would remember that. And that was the point. They'd remember that every bit of an animal was used before you could go to a grocery store and pick up just a slab of meat. You butchered your animals and used every portion. And those recipes for every portion exist. And these children's minds were blown. It was fantastic. If you ever want to capture the attention of about fourth graders, read them some recipes that they might consider gross. You'll capture their attention and you'll be able to teach them a little bit about what history was like and maybe what our ancestors, how they lived and how they ate and how they had animals and butchered them, etc. So maybe that'll give them a whole new understanding and appreciation for the grocery store and the feet that, or the food they can get quickly. I just read that. My dad loved pickled pig's feet. Oh my goodness. And cooked tongue. Oh, see, and traditionally today, that doesn't sound very good. But back in the day, everything was used. So why collect? Why collect these recipes? Why do we have these traditions? It's because we want to preserve the memories. It's our family history. No matter what we're looking at, it is part of our family history. One of my colleagues did a program on unusual records to research from, like report cards or things like that. It's recipes are an unusual record as well. You can learn more about the community, you can learn more about the history, you can learn more about your ancestors. And then also, if you have handwritten notes, you have kind of that touch of the past. You're able to pick up something that your ancestor actually held and wrote in, which is pretty amazing. So you want to have that information. So family history through recipes. Well, not only do we have the family heirlooms and those inscriptions and notes, we can look at the measurements and see what was different and how different the lifestyles were, what the social norms were. And what's great about these recipe books, the further back you get, the recipe books actually have things like medicinal recipes. Because at a certain point, you didn't have doctors in every town. And if you lived out in the country, in a rural area that didn't have a doctor nearby, you had to be able to take care of your own. Also, doctors could have been expensive. And having these recipes for medicine, that could have been what helped someone get through an illness without having to call for a doctor. So you want to look at these different things. All right, so one of the things with the measurements, and I want to share this with you. So there's a website called Homemade Dessert Recipes, and this guy's kind of awesome because what he did is he compiled information from vintage cookbooks and got the different measurements, which I think isn't pretty helpful. So if you're trying to figure out what 2 gills are, okay, 1 coffee cupful or 16 tablespoonfuls or 8 fluid ounces. We don't measure by gills any longer. We don't measure by tumblerful or goblet. So having this translation can really be helpful to making your research go a little better, a little easier. Another thing that you can look at are the handwritten recipe books. If you start looking at some of the older cookbooks, recipe books, you'll start finding the medicinal recipes. And these are pretty interesting. This one is a wound drink. So it involves liverwort, wood sage, I can't read all of these things, wormwood, etc. Okay, interesting. Strawberry leaves, I see that. So it's kind of interesting to think about what our ancestors used to make themselves feel better. And a lot of times people look at these as something that they could potentially use now with some more research. Some of them, putting leeches on people, not necessarily always recommended. Bleeding people, really not recommended. But there are things that could be. So it's interesting to look at, but always follow what your doctor says. Sounds like something out of Harry Potter. You are correct. You are correct. So I just want you to make sure want to make sure that you guys see that there are different things like medicinal recipes. And if you look at those old cookbooks, they're fantastic. Not only did they have medicinal recipes, they would tell you everything about what you need to be doing, how to do your laundry, how to properly wash windows, how to properly rear your children. Some of these recipe books are truly like a handbook for a wife. So if you're ever curious what life was like for your female ancestors, a lot of these books are a great place to start. You might learn a few things about them. So a couple other things that we really need to take a look at is, how do you preserve these recipes? One of the things that is problematic with these recipe books and why a lot of them don't survive is the fact that we actively use these books, and there's a high probability of getting ingredients on these books that can damage them. So not only can they damage them, they could also encourage critters to eat the pages. So you want to make sure that your original recipe books, the ones that matter to you, are preserved. Same with the recipe cards. You want to make sure that those are preserved, because you can always make photocopies. You can make scans. You can have copies that you can use for actual cooking or baking, and then still preserve the originals so they'll last and perhaps can be passed down to another generation. Just something to think about. Now, one of the things you can do is take a look at, see here as we open. There it is. There it is. I'm going to share my screen and share. Okay, so Library of Congress does a fantastic job of giving you information about how to preserve materials. They go through and tell you what you can preserve with books, paper, photographs, scrapbooks, and albums, etc. This is a great place to start for guidance. For your recipe books, some of them may end up under books, some may end up under scrapbooks and albums. It depends on how it's made. Another thing you can look at is the paper preservation. But rule of thumb is you want to make sure that the materials are in an acid-free environment, that they are in a cool, dark place, someplace where there's not a lot of moisture, like a basement. That is usually the safest thing you can do. You can get the different boxes for preservation. You can get the specific folders, etc., that are the acid-free. You can get them from the different companies that provide them, but you can also find them on Amazon or anywhere else. They are a little bit more expensive than a regular manila folder, but it will keep your materials safer over time. You could also make your own little envelopes out of acid-free paper, which might be a little bit cheaper in the long run. Again, another thing to keep in mind is, if you're going to be preserving these things, and if you want something that's less expensive, a clear Sterilite container, which you can get off of Amazon, probably Walmart, Target, etc. As long as you don't seal the container, it is archivally sound. If you seal it, you're trapping the off-gassing from the materials in the box, which you don't want to do. So these materials off-gas, and that's how a lot of them get ruined. Have you ever seen a paper burn, where you have two pieces of paper next to each other and one of them burns on like a shadow onto another piece of paper? That's what we're trying to prevent by putting the acid-free paper around them and then putting them in an archivally sound box of some sort. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions. And again, Library of Congress has a lot of great information, so make sure to check there. Okay, so digitization is also a really good option. Library of Congress has a lot of these online, but so do a lot of universities and a lot of other organizations across the United States and other countries. The libraries have really interesting ways of titling these collections. They could be cookery, it could be recipe, spelled the normal way, it could be recipe spelled as in receipt, it could be gastronomy, I can talk. So there's a lot of different umbrellas it could be under. So if you're looking for a specific location for recipe books to kind of get an idea of how your ancestors might have lived, you're going to need to use those terms interchangeably in your searching. And that's something I actually recommend, is looking up these digitization projects for your own research to understand more about your ancestors and how they lived and ate. Historical context is so important in understanding your family and understanding who they were and how they lived. And food is right there with it. Another thing you can do is update your recipes. Again, this guy, I really like him. He's got an oven temperature guide. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. Because some of these have recipes that call for a moderate oven. It's like, what's a moderate oven? How am I supposed to know what a moderate oven is? Okay, here we go, around 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Cool. That makes a lot more sense to me. So I highly recommend checking out things like this to get an idea of what the temperature guide should be. And you can also use the measurement tool from earlier. Let's go back here and share. We're just bebopping around. Okay, now we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about memoir. Collection of memories. Let's think about that. If you're going to collect memories, at what point are holidays not included? Holidays are a really important time for your families to gather and share stories. That's when you're going to get a lot of oral histories passed down. How many people have been in a kitchen at a holiday event with their family and heard a story, heard a family story while cooking, eating, etc. around food? In the chat, how many of you have had that experience? Okay, Patty has, Linda. Okay, so yeah, several of you have had that experience. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So when you're talking about that collection of memories, you want to record them. Well, how can you record them? Well, some of them have already been recorded through these recipes, the recipe cards. Or maybe they've been recorded in a handwritten book or a photo book. Maybe somebody's done a video recording or an audio recording. And if these haven't been recorded, what if you do it? What if this is the year that you record your family memories around food? So if you're going to do a recording and not just written, because sometimes written history, memoirs, etc., can overwhelm some people. audio and video recordings can overwhelm some people. It's about what makes you comfortable. There's no right or wrong way. It's just about recording the stories. You just need to remember those basics. Keep it simple, keep it short, keep it painless. Sometimes it could just be helpful at a family event to grab your phone, go to your audio recorder, hit record, and set it on the table, and just capture the stories that happen organically. You don't have to set up a fancy interview. You don't have to have questions prepared. You can just have a conversation about family and food, because we all relate to that. If you do want to do a writing, you can do a scrapbook or create a history. Now, there's some really cool things out there that people have created. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I'm going to share this, is on Etsy that you can literally buy recipe scrapbooks. People are selling pre-made scrapbooks that you can put together for your recipes, for your old recipes. So people are already putting these together. People are already creating this whole concept. So you can find things online pretty easily. I'm going to go back to this screen, share. And you know what? I am going to start my video. Hi, guys. I wanted to also show you, there are people that write histories. There's people that write memoirs, and they can be pretty intense. And you don't have to be a professional. And that's something to keep in mind. There's literary cookbooks out there. So this one's kind of fun. It's Dinner, a Love Story by Jenny Rosenstrach. It goes through and it talks about how her and her husband didn't make dinner. They ate out most of the time. And they made a plan to eat at home and start cooking recipes. And she documented it. She kept track of what was happening. She took pictures of her and her children. Now, this is a professionally done book. Yours doesn't have to be, but it can include the same type of information. Isn't that beautiful? You don't have to be a professional author. You don't have to have something hardbound that looks like this. Although you could create something in an online photo, like Snapfish. I believe that's one that's still used. So think about that. Think about the fact that you can create your own scrapbook, your own memoir. Let's go ahead and move forward. I love this where you have the recipe and then the memories that go along with it. And you want to keep that in mind, is that you can have these memories that go along with it. Now, something else to keep in mind is you don't want your recipe box to look like this forever, because at a certain point it won't exist much longer. But this is an example. This is my great grandmother's recipe box. And I can pop it open and find any recipe I want, whether it be handwritten or my personal favorite is the fact that she would take the recipes that were given to her, the printed ones, and stick them in here, or take them out of newspapers. So I have little newspaper clippings in here as well. But what this would tell me is, okay, this is what she was interested in. This is what she was pulling. This is the food that she was eating. And of course, this went to my grandmother as well. Micro peanut brittle. I'm guessing microwave. I haven't read this one. So make sure to check these out. If you have one of these recipe boxes, go through it, see what's in there. You might find a treasure or two or three. Another thing is when you're looking for history, when you're looking to understand your family, see if you can find any of the local cookbooks that are from the location. So this is 1962. So prior to me being alive, it's Order of the Eastern Star in Plymouth, Indiana. So this would be my grandmother. So this is a recipe book that she might have contributed to, but at the very least, she knew the people in it because she was a member. So I have this recipe book, so I can go through it and see, okay, these are the types of recipes that were being made in 1962 in the place that my family lived. So this is a more recent example. You can find other ones online. A lot of them have been digitized. And if we're talking about ancestors going back to the 1800s, I think that would be really interesting. I was showing this little guy, this little recipe book. Some of you may not have the video on, so I want to make sure that you guys see that I do have show and tell. Another thing that's really fun is when you have a cookbook like this. Does anybody recognize this? Anybody have one of these? Or have you seen one in your family? What I love about this is where you can find the recipes. Remember how I said ingredients are the things that are really going to ruin these? Look at this page. It's disgusting. Look how used this one is. Look at how dog-eared these pages are. That tells me that this is the section of the book that was used so frequently. And you want to know what this is? This is the pastry page. And I am not surprised at all. My grandmother loved to make pie. She is the one who taught me how to make pie and jam and everything else. So all of the pie section, this entire presentation is dedicated to her. The entire pie section, which has been coming out, this is what she used the most. And I know that. I know that from knowing her. I know that from oral tradition. I know that from looking at the book. So the book can give you clues to people. The recipes can give you clues to your family, even if you don't remember. Find the recipes that are the most well-loved or the most disgusting, depending on what's in there. Because let me tell you, this smells great. So make sure you're looking through all of the books you have, all of the recipe books, because you also want to make sure that you have things that might have notations. If there's something written in there, that could be the thing that is of most interest to you. And make sure to go through all of these different books and see, okay, is my family member in here? Because why would my family member have this specific cookbook? Did they contribute to it, or were they supporting the organization that created it? Because that happens a lot. You can learn a lot from your family members. You can learn a lot about food and what relates to your family in that historical context just by looking through these books that might be just sitting in your kitchen on a shelf. So I want you guys all to take a minute, pull them down, and flip through them and try to think about, where did these recipes come from? Where did these books come from? And what notations are in here? And then if you don't have the recipes or recipe books that have been passed down, look for them online. Look for the location your family came from. Look and see what's been digitized. Look and see if you can even purchase a cookbook or two that is specific to the location your family is from. You never know what you can find. You never know if your family members contributed to one of those cookbooks that was for a cause. I'm going to go ahead and share this screen again. So at the beginning, we saw a slide with pumpkin pie. And this is one of the earliest recipes for pumpkin pie, or pumpkin pie. It's an archaic term for pumpkin. It's from the Queen Lake Closet, 1670. And it's not going to look anything like the pumpkin pie we have today. Not only that, it's slices of pumpkin. It's not pureed. And it does have some sugar and raisins and currants, etc. But it's definitely not the pumpkin pie that you see at Thanksgiving. Thought you'd like to see the title page. I always find it interesting.